Man, Justice Sotomayor is so stupid. I listened to that whole, it was the Supreme Court Trump v. Colorado thing. I think it was actually called, what is it? It's Trump v. Anderson. I listened to the whole thing because I'm a nerd. But this is the one where they're trying to kick Trump off the ballot because he's an insurrectionist. And, I don't really want to get into that part, but I just want to say, I knew Sotomayor wasn't the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but here, she just showed herself to be completely fence post dumb. And not even like not knowing anything about the law, which she doesn't. I'm talking about not even being able to think. So, I got some clips here just to show you what I mean. And, I want to start out with something that, in all fairness, it was a bit confusing. But it only took me about 6 seconds to work it out. And it took her, let's just say, longer. So I'll start off playing this bit from earlier on. This is Trump's lawyer, Jonathan Mitchell, and he's going to be talking about term limits. Now, that kind of confused me at first for just a few seconds because this case doesn't have anything to do with term limits. That's the 22nd Amendment that says that you can't be president for more than 2 terms. And then I figured it out very quickly. Didn't take long, just like a few seconds. Let's see how long it takes you to work it out. Play along and see if you can figure out what this confusing term limits thing is all about.
Section 3 cannot be used to exclude a presidential candidate from the ballot, even if that candidate is disqualified from serving as president under Section 3, because Congress can lift that disability after the candidate is elected, but before he takes office. A state cannot exclude any candidate for federal office from the ballot on account of Section 3, and any state that does so is violating the holding of term limits by altering the Constitution's qualifications for federal office. The Colorado Supreme Court's decision is no different from a state residency law that requires members of Congress to inhabit the state prior to Election Day, when the Constitution requires only that members of Congress inhabit the state that they represent when elected. In both situations, a state is accelerating the deadline to meet a constitutionally imposed qualification and is thereby violating the holding of term limits. And in this situation, a ruling from this court that affirms the decision below would not only violate term limits, but take away the votes of potentially tens of millions of Americans.
So you figured it out, right? Term limits is obviously the name of some Supreme Court case. Now, it's okay if you don't know the case. I didn't either. I had to look it up. And it's U.S. Term Limits, Inc. v. Thornton. I'll link to it below. So in this case, a lot of people were frustrated because Congress didn't pass term limits. And of course, there's no amendment for term limits for members of Congress, House and Senate. So they just figured, hey, let's get Arkansas to do it. So Arkansas said you can't serve any more than 3 terms in the U.S. House or 2 in the Senate. Now, although a state can limit their own offices however much they want, the Supreme Court said that a state can't put any more restrictions on a federal office rather than state, than there were in the Constitution. So that's the case they were talking about, which the case makes sense, I guess, but Thomas wrote a good dissent. He pointed out it's kind of weird to shoot it down saying that the people should decide when the people voted in term limits by 60% because it came in by referendum. I won't get into it. I'll let you read it, but you get the idea. The point is, it's easy for anyone with a brain to cotton on to the fact that they're talking about a Supreme Court precedent and not actual presidential term limits. So let me play another clip where they're talking about this just to drive the point home that she had plenty of chances to figure this out.
Does the Secretary of State have the authority in that situation to say, no, you're disqualified?
No, the Secretary of State could not do that consistent with term limits, because even if the candidate is an admitted insurrectionist, Section 3 still allows the candidate to run for office and even win election to office, and then see whether Congress lifts that disability after the election.
All right, so even if he were an insurrectionist, the state still couldn't do it because Congress, according to the 14th Amendment, could remove that restriction by a 2/3 vote. And you don't know if they'll do that or not. You don't have a crystal ball. So this would be adding another restriction beyond what the Constitution describes, and term limits says you can't do that. And that's the point of this next clip.
And that's the key under term limits. Is the state in any way altering the criteria for a federal office, either for Congress or for the presidency? And in this situation, the Colorado Supreme Court is going slightly beyond what Section 3 requires, because Section 3, on its face, bans an insurrectionist only from holding.
Yeah, so Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is a restriction about holding office, not running for office or being elected to office, and states don't get any say in that, so they can't stop him from running. All right, one more. We'll get to Sotomayor, I promise, but one more just to show that it's really clear that term limits is referring to some Supreme Court precedent, not the 22nd Amendment. And this is about how term limits doesn't limit what Congress can get to do.
Really, your position is that Congress can't enact a statute that would allow Colorado to do what it's done either, because then Congress would be adding a qualification, which it can't do either.
No, I don't agree with that, Justice Barrett. Congress is not bound by the holding of term limits. Term limits only prohibits the states from adding additional qualifications or altering the Constitution's qualifications for federal office. It does not purport to restrain Congress.
Okay, so you get the idea. They made these points a lot, and you could have at least gotten the idea of it without me having to explain it, even if you didn't know specifically what term limits was, what the case was, but you can figure it out because you've got a brain in your head, unlike Sotomayor, who's about as sharp as a sack of wet mice. So let's listen to her confusion.
We have an argument, we believe, that is sufficient to dispose of this case just based on the meaning of officer of the United States, as well as the argument we're making based on term limits. But all of the consequentialist considerations that Your Honor has suggested are additional reasons to reverse the Colorado Supreme Court, although we don't think it's necessary to get into consequences because the law is clearly on our side.
You keep saying term limits. There are other presidential qualifications in the Constitution. Age.
Yes.
Oh. Man, what must it be like to be an attorney making these arguments and realizing you're speaking to someone whose IQ score came up negative? You just got to go along with it. This is the Supreme Court. You can't be disrespectful.
Citizenship. There's a separate amendment, the 22nd Amendment, that doesn't permit anyone to run for a second term.
It's not what we're
We
talking
have a
about.
history of states disqualifying, not all, but some, of disqualifying candidates who won't be of age if elected. We have a history of at least one state disqualifying someone who wasn't a U.S. citizen.
Right.
Are your arguments limited to Section 3?
Not quite. The question, Justice Sotomayor, is whether the state is violating term limits by adding to or altering the extant qualifications for the presidency in the Constitution. Now,
So you want us to say, I'm wondering why the term limits qualification is important to you.
because
Are you setting up so that if some president runs for a third term, that a state can't disqualify him from the ballot?
Of course,
No,
the state
he's
can
talking about
disqualify
the
him from
case,
ballot,
you idiot.
Because that is a qualification that is categorical. It's not defeasible by Congress. So a state is enforcing the Constitution when it says you can't appear on our ballot if you've already served 2 terms as president. The same
if they're underage when elected, and the same if they're not a U.S. citizen. The state would make a decision and say he's ineligible, and we would have to decide that question then. But my point is, so what, adding qualifications to what term limit is your argument based on?
You're changing.
I'm just confused.
Okay.
Yeah, You are confused. You're very confused. All right. Well, guess what? It's got to be up to John Roberts to save her. He's her white knight, and again, you got to be a gentleman about it.
When you say term limits, you mean our decision in the term limits case.
Yes, I'm
the
sorry.
Constitutional provision governing term limits.
Yes, U.S. term limits against Thornton. Maybe I should call it Thornton instead of term limits.
That would be
sorry.
easier.
Yeah, so Roberts is all like, I'm confused. When you say term limits, you mean the case. He's not confused. He knows perfectly well what he's talking about, but he can't say, hey, my stupid colleague over there is confused. You'll have to excuse her. She got a bit too much chlorine in her gene pool. Yeah, and so Mitchell's like, well, yeah, it's my fault. I could have been more clear, when he really means, yeah, she is a few ribs short of a barbecue, isn't she? All right. Okay, one more clip. We're away from term limits now. We're on a different subject this time, but again, just imagine how this poor lawyer must be feeling. And I gotta say, you know what? All of the other justices were fine, because a lot of people are saying that Jackson's dumb. I haven't really seen that. She has dumb ideas, but, well, she's hardly the only one. But Sotomayor, she's a bit like Paul Revere's ride. A little light in the belfry.
You argue that even though the president may or may not qualify, presidency may or may not qualify as an office under the United States, your principal argument is that the president is not an officer of the United States, correct?
Yeah, I would say it a little more forcefully than what Your Honor just described. We believe the presidency is excluded from office under the United States, but the argument we have that he's excluded the president as an officer of the United States is the stronger of the two textually and has fewer implications for other constitutions.
Bit of a gerrymandered rule, isn't it, designed to benefit only your client?
No, it's not gerrymandered. It's not a crinkly shaped district designed to get a certain person elected. This has nothing to do with districting. Gerrymandering is about districting. That has nothing. Dumb as a cardboard umbrella. All right. Again, let's see how Mitchell handles it.
I certainly wouldn't call it gerrymander. That implies nefarious.
Well, you didn't make.
Yeah, let's just pretend that's what you meant by gerrymandering. We're just gonna pretend, because we all know how stupid you are, but we're not gonna say it. This is open arguments in SCOTUS, so, I'm just gonna let the rest of this argument play out so you can hear it in full, but really the dumb part's pretty much over, but here's the rest of the argument.
It up. I know some scholars have been discussing it, but just so we're clear, under that reading, only the petitioner is disqualified, because virtually every other president except Washington has taken an oath to support the Constitution, correct?
That's right. Every president, to our knowledge, every other president. John Adams might also be excluded because he took the oath as a vice president, which is not an officer. But yes, President Biden would certainly be covered. He took the oath as a member of Congress, and that's true of every previous president.
Would that be true if we were to hold more narrowly in a reversal, that it's not Section 3 that's at issue, but Thornton and others, as to whether Section 3 can be enforced by states against the president?
That would extend to every presidential candidate, not
exactly, not just yours.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the wheel's spinning, but the hamster's dead. Yes, folks, that's 1/9 of our Supreme Court. Explains a lot, doesn't it? And can you believe there are all these lefties out there claiming that, oh, she's actually smart. She just eviscerated him. Yeah, she just tore him to pieces. Oh, God. Gaslighting, man, I'm telling you. All right. That's all I gotta say, other than comments for the comment God, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And you also know donate.bogosity.tv. I can't stress this enough. Sharing and donating. Sharing to get it up in the algorithm. Donating to get more money coming in. Yeah, the sparse videos last week, of course, was because of family matters that I won't go into again, but when I do these things, you got to prioritize things in life. And when it comes to things that make money that I have to, that I have to pull back on, YouTube's kind of at the bottom because it's basically gas money, which is not insignificant these days. But still, if I'm knocking out things that bring in money, I got other things that thankfully bring in more money than YouTube. But that does mean that if you want me to make more of these, that's what's going to happen if something else happens like this, because this happens every now and then. Real life happens, and you got to prioritize. If you want me to prioritize YouTube videos more, donate.bogosity.tv. You can send me a one-time donation or become a regular supporter of Patreon or Subscribestar. Get these videos early and ad-free. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.